Maybe two names who are new to you in this concert: Joan Tower and Amy Beach. Joan Tower is a modern composer, and her Fanfare for the Uncommon Woman is a kind of ironic response to the title of one of Aaron Copland's most famous pieces, Fanfare for the Common Man. If you don't think you know it, you'll recognize it because it's used on the television an awful lot, particularly at Olympic ceremonies. She's written this as a tribute, in a sense, partly to womanhood in general, but to one very remarkable woman indeed, Amy Beach, whose second symphony we're hearing in the first part of this concert. Amy Beach was a very fine composer in the late 19th, early 20th century, an American woman. She actually achieved quite a reputation in those days, which was pretty formidable, given that women composers tended to be dismissed a lot in supposedly cultivated circles. This is her second symphony, called the Gaelic, and it was her response to hearing a very, very important event in American musical life, which was the premiere of Antonin Dvorak's From the New World Symphony in 1893. What Dvorak had shown extraordinarily in the New World Symphony was that you could take ideas associated not with continental Europe, but with America. And he used, for instance, elements of Black American spirituals or Native American dance rhythms and draw them into the symphony in the hope, he said, that he could show America how to draw on its own unique cultural heritage and create a classical music of its own. A lot of people didn't like the idea of drawing on Black American spirituals and Native American music at the time, but others were enthralled. And one of them was Amy Beach, who the very following year, 1894, wrote her own second symphony, the Gaelic. Now, it's interesting that her symphony is in the same key as the Dvorak, that's E minor, but that's about all they have in common, other than that she too uses folk elements. Now, she chooses a different thing, which is to do with her own Celtic heritage. She uses Irish and Scottish folk music to show that that's part of the American heritage too, which is very true. Why does it look as though she was drawing back from Dvorak's point about American music being also rooted in the Native American and in the Black American spiritual? Well, no, I don't think she was. I think she realized that just to go the same route that Dvorak had wouldn't be an artistically satisfying path, and she'd end up composing too much in his own shadow. So she chose her own heritage, as it were, in this symphony to show how another kind of synthesis could be made, drawing in folk music to the music of the ordinary people. But she certainly did become much more interested in the music of the Native American peoples, including the Inuit people in the north. And she, in later works, drew these in. This is a big symphony, like Dvorak's. It's very dramatic in its outer movements. And it also, as I said, draws on in folk music, particularly in its second movement, which is a set of variations on a couple of Irish and Scottish tunes. But it has a drama of its own. It's remarkable that somebody, any composer at all, could have come up with something so original and so gripping and so dramatic and compelling in response to Dvorak's New World Symphony without just imitating it. You know, it's so easy to be overshadowed by something that's impressed you, and she's clearly impressed by it, but she's gone entirely her own way. And I think this is a piece that does point very strongly to some of the, I think, even more remarkable pieces that were to emerge later in Amy Beach's career. After that, two names you almost certainly will know: George Gershwin and Leonard Bernstein. Even if your titles don't mean anything to you, certainly the Gershwin pieces, I think, will be recognizable. I Got Rhythm is one of his most famous songs, and this little kind of mini concerto for piano and orchestra has lots of fun and games with the complicated rhythms in the Gershwin original, where Gershwin, of course, is of course inspired by Afro-American jazz. Something that was to become more and more important, and also which acknowledged increasingly, composers like Duke Ellington, for instance, acknowledged that Dvorak's New World was a seminal influence for them too. Catfish Row is a suite of tunes from Gershwin's opera Porgy and Bess about Black people in the Deep South. And again, the tunes will be marvelously familiar to you, I'm pretty sure. What is remarkable, though, is the way that Gershwin doesn't just take great tunes and stitch them together. He makes a sequence here that really plays almost like a mini drama in its own right. Finally, Leonard Bernstein's 3 episodes from On the Town. An amazing show on the town. It is just full on, full energy. It's kind of New York at its most intense, wired, determined to party with an exclamation mark at all cost. Interesting that it turns out that it was written in the middle of the war, when America was, well, you couldn't blame Americans for wanting to turn to something a little bit more distracting and enjoyable in its own right. It is full on. It doesn't have moments like West Side Story, which take you into darker, more tragic, more poignant experiences of humanity. No, it's just really affirmation at full throttle. But Bernstein could do that so brilliantly. And Bernstein was also one of the great synthesizers. You can tell that he's aware of jazz, he's aware of blues, he's aware of Native American music, he's aware of all sorts of things, and also deeply aware of the European heritage in American classical music too, and of course of the astonishing achievements of Broadway, which is a genre in its own right. And all that comes together in this amazing piece, which is just, as I said, it's almost kind of like strobe lighting sometimes. It comes at you so intensely and is so full of good tunes. It's kind of New York in its heyday, absolutely distilled into music. And I think it'll make a fascinating companion, in a sense, to Amy Beach, who's looking forward in her symphony as to what could be. And there we have in Bernstein and in Gershwin, I think, the finest flowering of what was to become.